So, you finally decide to buy your first DSLR. You've watched dozens of YouTube reviews, compared Canon versus Nikon, maybe Sony versus Fujifilm. You finally find the perfect camera. The body costs around $1,500. Expensive? Absolutely. But here's the strange part. 5 years later, many photographers discover the camera body wasn't the expensive purchase. It was the cheapest one. Because nobody sells you a camera, they sell you an ecosystem. And once you're inside, every future purchase becomes easier and somehow much more expensive. One lens becomes two become five. A $30 UV filter somehow turns into a $300 filter collection. A spare battery, a faster memory card, a sturdier tripod, a camera backpack, a flash, a wireless trigger, a drone, a gimbal, a second camera body just in case. Before long, your $1,500 hobby quietly becomes a $12,000 camera system. And here's the twist. Most people don't realize it until years later because they never bought everything at once. They bought just one more accessory, again and again and again. Today, let's uncover the hidden economics behind owning a DSLR camera system and why the camera itself may only represent 1/3 of what you'll eventually spend. Imagine two friends, Alex and Brian. Both want to learn photography. Alex walks into a camera store. He buys a Canon EOS R8 with the standard kit lens. His receipt says $1,700. He smiles. I've invested in photography. Brian walks in 6 years later. He buys Alex's used camera for $850. Same camera, same image quality, half the price. Who made the better financial decision? Most beginners immediately answer Brian. But they're both asking the wrong question because neither purchase tells you what photography actually costs. Economists have a phrase for this, total cost of ownership, or TCO. It's one of the most misunderstood concepts in consumer spending. The purchase price is only the visible part. Everything else happens later. Cars have maintenance, homes have repairs, boats have docking fees, private jets have crews, and DSLR cameras? They have accessories, lots of accessories. Here's something fascinating. Camera companies know something about human psychology. Selling you the camera is only the beginning. Canon, Sony, Nikon, Fujifilm. They don't just manufacture cameras, they build ecosystems, because ecosystems create commitment. Once you've invested in one lens mount, switching brands becomes painfully expensive. That creates something economists call switching costs, and switching costs are incredibly profitable. Let's say you spend $1,600 on a Sony camera. A year later, you've added 3 lenses worth $3,500, 2 flashes, a backpack, extra batteries, several filters, memory cards. Now imagine Canon releases an incredible new camera. Would you switch? Probably not. Not because the camera isn't better, but because replacing your entire lens collection might cost another $5,000 to $8,000. Suddenly, your old camera isn't keeping you loyal. Your accessories are. The camera company no longer needs to convince you to stay. Your own wallet already has. Here's where things become interesting. Most beginners believe photography starts with buying a camera. Professional photographers know photography starts with buying your first lens, because the kit lens rarely stays around for long. The moment you browse photography forums or YouTube, you'll hear the same advice. The kit lens isn't sharp enough. You need a 50. You need better bokeh. You need faster class. You need an ultra-wide. You need a telephoto. Need. Notice something? Nobody says, you already have enough. Let's use a real-world example. A beginner purchases a Canon EOS R10 with an RF-SE 18 to 45mm kit lens for roughly $1,100. Everything seems complete until they photograph indoors. The lens struggles in low light, so they buy the popular RF 50mm f1.8, around $200. A few months later, they travel. Now they want wider landscapes, another lens, around $500. Then, a friend's wedding. They need zoom, a 70 to 200mm lens, maybe $1,500. Suddenly, the camera body accounts for less than 1/3 of everything they've spent, and that's before accessories. One survey after another shows a similar pattern. Many enthusiast photographers own 3 to 6 lenses. Professionals often own far more. Why? Because lenses solve problems, but every solved problem creates another opportunity to spend. You buy a portrait lens. Now you notice you don't have a macro lens. You buy a macro. Now birds are too far away. You buy wildlife glass. Now it's too heavy. You buy a carbon fiber tripod. Then you need a stronger tripod head. Then a backpack large enough to carry it. Every solution creates another purchase. Economically, this is known as complementary goods. One product increases demand for another. The more cameras sold, the more lenses sell. The more filters sell, the more camera bags sell. It's a chain reaction, and manufacturers know exactly how it works. Here's something surprising. For many camera manufacturers, the camera body isn't necessarily where the biggest lifetime profit comes from. Think about smartphones. Apple doesn't just sell iPhones. It sells AirPods, Apple Watch, MagSafe chargers, cases, subscriptions. Every purchase expands the ecosystem. Camera companies operate similarly. A photographer who owns one body may continue buying compatible equipment for the next 10 years. That's an incredibly valuable customer. In fact, industry analysts have long noted that interchangeable lens systems create recurring revenue because owners keep expanding their gear collections long after the initial camera purchase. The body may only be replaced every 5 or 6 years. Lenses, accessories, those purchases happen constantly. And unlike camera bodies, high-end lenses often maintain stronger prices, which means manufacturers can earn healthy margins for years. Now here's the first big twist. Many experienced photographers eventually realize the lens matters more than the camera, not the other way around. A professional photographer using a 5-year-old camera with a premium lens can often produce better images than someone using the newest flagship body with a cheap kit lens. Ironically, the thing beginners spend the least time thinking about becomes the thing they spend the most money on. The camera got them into photography. The lenses kept them spending. And yet, even lenses are only the beginning. Because after you've bought the glass, you discover something photographers jokingly call the accessory rabbit hole. And that's where the real economics begin. At this point, Alex owns 3 lenses, a standard zoom, a 50mm prime, and a telephoto. He assumes, I'm finally done buying gear. Then, a salesperson asks a simple question. Would you like a UV filter to protect your new lens? It's only another $40. Sounds reasonable. After all, the front element of a professional lens can cost hundreds of dollars to replace, so Alex buys one. A month later, he starts shooting landscapes. Now he needs a circular polarizing filter, around $80 to $200 depending on the brand and size. It makes blue skies richer, cuts reflections from water, improves contrast. Then he watches a YouTube tutorial about long exposure photography to blur waterfalls, create silky oceans, or remove crowds from busy tourist attractions. Now he needs an ND filter, another $100 to $250. Then he discovers graduated ND filters, mist filters, variable ND filters, magnetic filter systems. Suddenly, a lens that costs $900 quietly accumulates another $500 in accessories. And here's the irony. The bigger your lens, the bigger your filters. A premium 82mm filter can easily cost twice as much as a 67mm version, not because it's twice as useful, simply because it's bigger. Now imagine Alex owns 4 lenses. One uses a 67mm filter thread, another 72mm, another 77mm, the last one, 82mm. He has 2 choices: buy 4 complete sets of filters, or buy one expensive 82mm filter and then purchase metal step-up rings so it fits the smaller lenses. Most experienced photographers choose the second option because replacing 4 complete filter sets could cost well over $1,000. This is something almost no beginner thinks about until after they've already bought incompatible accessories. A tiny difference in lens diameter can quietly multiply your costs. Then comes storage. Most beginners think a memory card is just a memory card. Not quite. Modern cameras shoot 20, 30, even 60 megapixel RAW files. Some record 4K or 8K video. That requires incredibly fast storage. A cheap card might cause buffering, dropped frames, or stop recording altogether. Professional photographers don't buy one memory card, they buy several. Because cards fail, they get lost, they fill up during weddings, or clients simply expect you to have backups. A reliable 128GB UHS-2 SD card often costs between $80 and $180. CF Express cards, common in high-end cameras, can cost $200 to $500 each, and professionals rarely own just one. Imagine carrying 4 CF Express cards. That's another $1,000. Just to save photos. Then comes battery life. Manufacturers usually include 1 battery, maybe enough for a casual afternoon, but not enough for weddings, wildlife photography, travel, or all-day events. So photographers buy extras. Official batteries often cost between $60 and $100 each. Third-party versions are cheaper, but many photographers still prefer originals for reliability. Now add a dual charger, USB chargers for travel, power banks, dummy batteries for studio work, external battery grips. Each purchase seems small until you add everything together. It's death. Buy 1,000 accessories. Here's another surprise. A beginner buys a $60 tripod. It works until they mount a $2,000 telephoto lens on top. Suddenly, the tripod shakes. The head slips. The camera slowly tilts. Long exposures become blurry. Now they upgrade. A professional carbon fiber tripod from companies like Gitzo, Really Right Stuff, or Leofoto often costs anywhere from $400 to well over $1,000. But that's only the legs. The tripod head, another $200 to $600. Need an L bracket? Another $100. Quick release plates?
another $50. Carry strap, another $40. A tripod isn't one product, it's a platform, exactly like the camera itself. Here's something photographers rarely admit. No camera bag lasts forever. Not because it breaks, because your gear outgrows it. Alex starts with one camera, one lens, a compact shoulder bag. 6 months later, he buys another lens. The bag no longer fits. He upgrades. A year later, he buys a drone. Now he needs a backpack. Then airline travel becomes a problem. His backpack exceeds carry-on limits, so he buys a travel-friendly roller case. Eventually, he owns 4 different camera bags. Each one solved a problem, for a while. It's surprisingly similar to buying homes. People don't usually purchase their dream house first. They upgrade gradually. Camera bags follow the same economics.
And that's an entirely different industry. Most beginners believe photography is about cameras. Professionals know photography is about light. Eventually, Alex wants better portraits. Someone tells him, you don't need a better camera, you need better lighting. So he buys his first speedlight, around $120 to $300. Then a wireless trigger, another $80. Then a softbox, light stand, umbrella, reflector, sandbags, rechargeable batteries, battery charger, color gels. Before long, his lighting kit costs more than the camera body itself. And if he starts doing commercial photography, 1 flash becomes 3, 3 become 5, 1 modifier becomes 10. Lighting becomes its own ecosystem inside the camera ecosystem. Here's something that surprises many new photographers. When you see a photographer shooting a wedding, you notice the camera, maybe the lens. What you don't see is the thousands of dollars hidden just outside the frame. The assistant carrying extra lenses, the backup camera body, the flashes, the light stands, the spare batteries, the backup memory cards, the rolling equipment case, the laptop waiting in the car. Professional photography isn't expensive because of one camera. It's expensive because professionals build redundancy. If one battery dies, the job continues. If one memory card fails, the wedding is still saved. If one camera breaks, the client never notices. That redundancy is invisible, but economically, it's one of the largest costs of being a professional. Lens Rentals, one of the largest camera equipment rental companies in the United States, has shared an interesting observation over the years. Many customers rent equipment not because they can't afford it, but because buying specialized gear makes no economic sense. Imagine you're photographing wildlife once a year. A 600mm f4 super telephoto lens can cost $13,000 to $16,000. Renting it for a weekend, perhaps $250 to $500. Even if you rented it every year for 10 years, you'd still spend far less than owning it. This reveals something fascinating. Ownership isn't always the cheapest option. Sometimes access is more valuable than ownership. It's the same reason companies lease airplanes, businesses rent construction equipment, or filmmakers rent cinema cameras, because utilization matters more than possession. If an expensive asset sits unused most of the year, it's quietly losing money. Most beginners think buying the camera means they've entered photography. In reality, buying the camera is only buying a ticket. The real spending begins afterward. Every new skill unlocks another purchase. Macro photography, macro lens. Bird photography, long telephoto. Astrophotography, fast wide-angle lens. Studio photography, lighting equipment. Video, microphones. ND filters, gimbals, external monitors. The deeper you go into photography, the more specialized your equipment becomes. And specialization is where manufacturers make their money. But surprisingly, accessories still aren't the biggest hidden cost of owning a DSLR system, because there's one expense almost every photographer experiences. It's invisible, it's emotional, and it convinces perfectly happy people to replace gear that still works. It's called gear acquisition syndrome, and economically, it may be the most expensive accessory of all. At this point, Alex owns a camera, 4 lenses, 3 filters, 2 flashes, a sturdy tripod, extra batteries, memory cards, a backpack. He spent nearly $7,000. Finally, he tells himself, that's it, I'm done buying gear. Then, Sony announces a new camera. It has 5-axis image stabilization, better autofocus, faster burst shooting, cleaner low-light performance, a brighter screen, improved eye tracking. Suddenly, Alex's perfectly functional camera feels old. Not because it stopped taking good photos, because something newer exists. And this is where economics becomes psychology. Consumer technology doesn't just sell products. It sells improvement. Every year, manufacturers introduce features with names like next-generation autofocus, AI subject recognition, stacked sensor, global shutter, 8K RAW, 40 frames per second. Most photographers will never need these features, but that's not the point. The goal isn't to convince professionals, it's to make enthusiasts wonder, what if this makes me a better photographer? That tiny question has fueled billions of dollars in camera sales. Photographers even have a name for it, gear acquisition syndrome, or simply GAS. It started as an inside joke on photography forums. Today, almost every serious photographer recognizes it. GAS isn't about needing equipment, it's about believing the next purchase will unlock better results. And psychologically, that belief makes perfect sense. Buying gear creates instant satisfaction. Learning composition takes months. Practicing lighting takes years. Mastering storytelling can take a lifetime. One requires effort, the other only requires a credit card. So our brains naturally prefer buying over practicing. Economists call this the hedonic treadmill. Here's how it works. Alex buys a $2,000 camera. For the first week, he's thrilled. He watches reviews, reads the manual, carries it everywhere. A month later, the excitement fades. The camera becomes normal. Then another company releases something newer. Now Alex wants that. Not because his current camera became worse, but because his expectations changed. The cycle repeats, again and again. This isn't unique to photography. It's the same reason people upgrade smartphones every 2 or 3 years, buy larger televisions, or replace perfectly functional cars. Humans adapt remarkably fast to ownership, and once adaptation happens, we start chasing novelty again. 20 years ago, most photographers compared themselves to people in local camera clubs. Today, they're comparing themselves to millions of creators on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok. Every day, someone uploads a video titled, "My New Dream Camera. Why I Switched to Sony. The lens every photographer needs. The ultimate travel setup." These videos are entertaining, often educational, but they also normalize constant upgrading. If your favorite creator changes cameras every year, keeping your 5-year-old camera suddenly feels like falling behind, even if your photos haven't changed at all. The best photographers often upgrade the least. Walk into a major news agency, or a wedding studio, or a commercial photography business, you'll notice something interesting. Many professionals aren't using the newest equipment. Why? Because equipment only gets replaced when it increases profit, not when it increases excitement. If a camera still delivers reliable autofocus, excellent image quality, and clients are happy, why replace it? Professional businesses think differently. Every purchase must justify itself financially. Amateurs often ask, "What do I want?" Professionals ask, "What will earn more than it costs?" Those are completely different questions. Now let's talk about the hidden cost almost nobody mentions: depreciation. Unlike premium lenses, camera bodies lose value remarkably fast. According to used camera market trends over the past decade, flagship camera bodies often lose 30 to 50% of their value within 3 to 5 years, depending on the model and release cycle. Let's say Alex buys a camera for $2,500. 3 years later, a replacement model launches. His camera now sells used for around $1,400. He's lost over $1,000, not because anything broke. Technology simply moved forward. That's depreciation. It's silent, invisible, and completely unavoidable.
Ironically, the accessory many beginners hesitate to buy often becomes the better investment. High-quality lenses depreciate much more slowly. Take Canon's famous EF 70-200mm f2.8L IS2, or Nikon's professional 70-200mm f2.8, or Sony's GM series. Many premium lenses retain a surprisingly high percentage of their value for years. Some discontinued lenses have even appreciated because demand remained strong while supply disappeared. That's because good optics don't become obsolete nearly as quickly as digital electronics. Sensors evolve, processors improve, autofocus gets smarter, but physics changes very slowly. A sharp lens today will likely still be a sharp lens 10 years from now. Now, imagine something different. Instead of spending another $2,000 upgrading his camera, Alex spends that money on experiences. A photography workshop in Iceland, a wildlife trip to Kenya, a week exploring the streets of Tokyo, or simply 50 weekend road trips close to home. Which investment improves his photography more? Economists call this opportunity cost. Every dollar spent on one thing cannot be spent somewhere else. Many photographers unknowingly own $15,000 worth of equipment, yet rarely leave their city to photograph anything interesting. They invested in tools, but not opportunities. Now think from the manufacturer's perspective. Imagine you're Canon, or Nikon, or Sony. How do you convince millions of existing customers to buy another camera when their current one still works? You don't wait for it to fail. You introduce just enough improvement to make keeping the old one feel uncomfortable. A little better autofocus, a little faster shooting, a little cleaner ISO, a little smarter AI. Each improvement sounds small. Together, they create urgency. Not because photographers suddenly need a new camera, because they don't want to miss out. This is one of the most powerful business models in consumer technology. Sell products that become psychologically outdated long before they become physically unusable. Here's something surprising. Most photographers don't stop buying gear because they finally own everything. They stop because they eventually realize more equipment doesn't necessarily create better photographs. That realization often takes years, sometimes thousands of dollars, sometimes an entire closet filled with camera bags and lenses. Eventually, many experienced photographers simplify. One camera, two lenses, that's all they carry. Not because they can't afford more, because experience taught them less gear often means more photography. But even after escaping the upgrade cycle, there's still one final economic question. If owning a professional camera system costs this much, why do millions of people continue buying one? The answer has almost nothing to do with photography itself, and everything to do with identity, emotion, and the surprisingly high return that cameras can generate if they're used the right way.
After everything we've discussed, the lenses, the filters, the flashes, the memory cards, the upgrades, the depreciation, the psychological trap of buying more gear, you might think the conclusion is obvious. Owning a professional DSLR system is a terrible financial decision. But that isn't true, because economics is never about asking, is something expensive? Economics asks a different question. What value does this asset create? And that's where the story changes. Or liability. Imagine two people, Alex and Sarah. Both spent exactly $8,000 building nearly identical camera systems. Same camera, same lenses, same accessories. 5 years later, Alex's gear sits in a closet. He occasionally photographs vacations, family birthdays, Christmas, maybe a sunset once every few months. Sarah uses the same equipment to shoot 20 weddings a year, corporate headshots, real estate listings, product photography, social media campaigns for local businesses. At the end of 5 years, both own the same equipment, but economically, they're living in completely different worlds. Alex bought a hobby. Sarah bought a business. The equipment didn't determine the outcome. Utilization did. One of the most important concepts in economics is asset utilization. A factory that operates 24 hours a day generates far more value than one that sits idle. The same is true for airplanes, construction equipment, rental properties, and cameras. Imagine buying a $3,000 camera. If you use it once a month, it becomes a very expensive toy. If you use it every day to earn income, its cost per use dramatically. Let's do the math. Suppose a freelance photographer invests $10,000 in a complete camera system. They book just 25 paid shoots per year, charging an average of $500 each. That's $12,500 in annual revenue. Even after accounting for travel, editing software, insurance, taxes, and other expenses, the camera system could effectively pay for itself within the first year or two. Now compare that with someone who uses the same system only 20 times a year for personal enjoyment. After 5 years, their cost per shoot is still hundreds of dollars. The equipment is identical, the economics are not. 20 years ago, buying expensive camera equipment usually meant one thing: you wanted to become a professional photographer. Today, that's no longer true. A camera can generate income in dozens of ways: YouTube, online courses, commercial video production, product photography, real estate media, travel content, wedding photography, food photography, stock images, drone services, brand collaborations, social media management. In the creator economy, the camera isn't just recording memories, it's producing digital assets. One well-made YouTube video can continue generating advertising revenue for years. A product photo can sell thousands of units for a business. A wedding album becomes a lifelong memory for a client. The camera becomes a tool for creating intellectual property, and intellectual property often scales far better than physical labor. But here's another twist. You don't always need to own everything. In fact, many successful photographers don't. Need a 600mm wildlife lens for one weekend? Rent it. Need a cinema camera for a commercial project? Rent it. Need specialty lighting for a fashion shoot? Rent it. The rental industry exists because ownership isn't always efficient. Companies like lens rentals, borrow lenses, local camera shops, and peer-to-peer rental platforms have built businesses around one simple economic reality. Most specialized equipment spends the majority of its life sitting on a shelf. Why pay $15,000 for a lens you'll use twice a year when you can rent it for a few $100s? This is exactly the same economic principle behind cloud computing. Businesses don't buy massive servers anymore. They rent computing power when they need it. Access has become more valuable than ownership. Photography is moving in the same direction.
Here's something interesting. Ask a beginner what their dream purchases. They'll usually name a camera. Ask an experienced professional, and many will answer differently. Some invest in education. Some invest in marketing. Some invest in networking. Some invest in travel, because they understand something beginners often don't. The camera creates the image, but the business creates the income. A photographer with average equipment and excellent client relationships will often earn far more than someone with $20,000 worth of gear and no customers. The return on investment doesn't always come from buying better equipment. Sometimes it comes from becoming easier to hire. Throughout this video, we've talked about thousands of dollars in equipment, but perhaps the largest hidden cost isn't financial at all. It's time. Hours spent comparing camera bodies, watching gear reviews, reading forum debates, obsessing over sharpness charts, pixel peeping, arguing about brands. Every hour spent chasing the perfect setup is an hour not spent taking photographs. Ironically, the photographers with the strongest portfolios often spend the least time talking about equipment because they're busy using it. Let's go back to the beginning. Remember that $1,500 camera? At first, it looked expensive. Then we discovered it was only the beginning. By the time you add lenses, filters, lighting, storage, tripods, bags, maintenance, insurance, software subscriptions, and future upgrades, your investment can quietly reach $10,000, $15,000, or even $20,000. But here's the surprising part. For many photographers, the money wasn't wasted. The friendships they built, the places they visited, the businesses they started, the memories they preserved, the careers they created, those things can't be measured on a receipt. A camera isn't valuable because of the shutter count. It's valuable because of what it allows you to create.
Owning a DSLR camera system isn't expensive because cameras are overpriced. It's expensive because cameras are gateways to an entire ecosystem. Every new capability unlocks another accessory. Every new accessory unlocks another specialization. Every specialization creates another temptation to spend. That's why the camera body is rarely the most expensive part of photography. It's simply the first domino. The real cost is the ecosystem that follows, and that's the economics of owning a DSLR camera system. Now I'm curious, if you had $5,000 to spend on photography today, would you buy the newest camera body, or would you spend it on travel, education, and experiences instead? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy uncovering the hidden economics behind the products, hobbies, and industries that shape our everyday lives, from DSLR camera systems and luxury watches to RVs, boats, private jets, and digital businesses, be sure to subscribe, because sometimes the price tag is only the beginning. The real story is every